Canada's failures of protecting and promoting diversity are always put at the forefront, and for good reason. Canada's residential schools are a fine example of the assimilation that went on in the past, and the effects of these schools has not always been brought to light. Aboriginals, First Nations, Inuit, and Métis were not only stripped of their culture, but were also abused psychologically, physically, and sexually, and were deprived of basic needs such as proper nutrition. Many accounts of former students stated that any act of their culture, language, dances, and rituals was punished severely. The students were also forced to do manual labor, sometimes dangerous, and were fed poor quality food. Many accounts say that the food was moldy, maggot infested, or rotten. Although many schools had poor living conditions, some students still had positive experiences and received adequate education. This absorption of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis was overall negative and has left many gaps in Aboriginal culture. Some gaps will never be filled. You may say that the intent of the residential schools was to solely educate the Aboriginal children to give them a chance in the newly established country. I'd beg to differ, as over 40% of the teachers in the schools were not professionally trained and gave the students a substandard education. The intent of the schools was not to educate, it was to assimilate and vilify their society as a whole. In the words of Duncan Campbell Scott, a government official, the system was designed to kill the Indian inner child. A bold statement, but it described the design of the assimilation system. These schools impacted the Aboriginals of Canada long term. In many cases, the abuses, and even the common experiences of attending residential schools have caused post-traumatic stress syndrome and have made it difficult for former students to engage in family, social, and work situations. Intergenerational trauma is a cycle of abuse and trauma that carries on from one generation to the next. It is highly common for many Aboriginal households to be abusive in nature, which is caused by the adoption of abusive behaviors that took place in the residential schools. Survivors were also taken away from their parents for long periods of time, and this isolation prohibited the necessary parenting skills that those children needed. Aboriginal communities are still in need of healing, and there are many cases of violence, crime, substance abuse, and suicide. Although the Canadian government and the churches involved in the residential schools have apologized, and they have formed healing foundations and made agreements, it will never be enough to restore what they took, stole, and destroyed. Oh, jeez. Oh, that hurts the frickin' hand.